The oncologist's words hit me like a freight train. "Without immediate treatment, you have 3 months to live, Mrs. Anderson." I walked straight to my son's office that same afternoon, medical papers clutched in my shaking hands. When he looked up from his computer screen and saw the expression on my face, I knew he understood this wasn't a social visit. If you're watching this, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. The fluorescent lights in Dr. Martinez's office had been too bright, making everything feel surreal as she explained how the aggressive cancer had already spread to my lymph nodes. "We need to start treatment immediately," she'd said, her voice professional but kind. "The specialized therapy costs $85,000, but it's your best shot at beating this thing." I'd sat there in that sterile room, thinking about how I'd raised my son David alone after his father abandoned us when he was 12, working double shifts as a hospital administrator to put him through law school. Now, at 62, I needed him more than I'd ever needed anyone. David's law office occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown building, all glass and chrome and expensive furniture that screamed success. His secretary announced me with barely concealed surprise, since I never visited unannounced. When I entered his corner office, he was reviewing documents, his dark hair perfectly styled, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Mom, what's wrong?" He could read the panic in my face immediately. I placed the medical reports on his mahogany desk. "I have cancer, David. Aggressive lymphoma. Without treatment, I have 3 months." The color drained from his face as he scanned the papers. "Jesus, Mom, I'm so sorry." He stood up and came around the desk to embrace me, and for a moment, I felt the relief of having my child take care of me. "The treatment isn't covered by insurance," I continued, my voice steadier now. "It's experimental, but it's my only chance. $85,000. David returned to his chair, the businessman mask sliding back into place. "That's a lot of money, Mom." Something in his tone made my stomach clench. "I know it is. But David, I'm asking for my life." He leaned back, fingers steepled, the same gesture I remembered from when he was a child, trying to get out of trouble. "Let me talk to Jessica about it. We'll need to see what we can do." Jessica, his wife of 3 years, who'd never liked me much. The woman who'd convinced him to move across town so they wouldn't have to deal with family obligations too often. That should have been my first warning. But hope makes you overlook red flags, doesn't it? I hugged him goodbye, thinking surely my only child wouldn't let me die for lack of money. After all, I'd sacrificed everything for him. Surely that counted for something. I was about to learn exactly how much it counted. 3 days later, David called instead of visiting, which should have told me everything I needed to know. His voice sounded different, rehearsed, like he was reading from a script Jessica had written. "Mom, we've been talking about your situation." "Our situation," I corrected gently. "David, this is about your mother's life." The silence stretched uncomfortably before he cleared his throat. "Right, of course. It's just that $85,000 is our entire emergency fund. Jessica's worried about what would happen if we had our own medical emergency." I stared out my kitchen window at the garden I'd been tending for 15 years, wondering if I'd live to see another spring. "David, I'm not asking you to go into debt. I know you have the money." He'd just made partner at his firm, and Jessica worked as a pharmaceutical sales rep. They weren't hurting financially. "It's not that simple, Mom. We have responsibilities, obligations, the house payment, Jessica's student loans. We're trying to start a family." Each excuse felt like a small knife to my chest. "I raised you alone after your father left us with nothing," I said quietly. "I worked 2 jobs to put you through law school. I never once asked you to pay me back." "That was your choice," he said, and I heard Jessica's influence in those cold words. "You chose to have a child. You chose to support me. I didn't ask for any of that." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. This stranger's voice couldn't be coming from my son, the boy I'd rocked through nightmares, cheered at every baseball game, celebrated with at his law school graduation. "David, I'm asking for my life. $85,000 to live." My voice cracked despite my efforts to stay strong. "I'll find another way," he said quickly, as if that solved everything. "There are programs, charity care, payment plans. You don't need to burden us with this." Burden. That's what I'd become to my own child. After hanging up, I sat in my empty house and realized something fundamental had shifted. The son I'd raised, The man I'd been so proud of didn't exist anymore. Or maybe he'd never existed at all, and I'd been loving an illusion. I spent the next 2 days researching every possible financial option, calling charity organizations, looking into medical loans with crushing interest rates. Every door led to dead ends or waiting lists months long, time I didn't have. Then Jessica posted the invitation on Facebook, and everything became crystal clear. You're cordially invited to celebrate Jessica Anderson's 30th birthday extravaganza. The Facebook invitation was elegant, printed on what looked like expensive cardstock, photographed against a backdrop of white roses. Join us for an unforgettable evening at the Four Seasons Ballroom featuring dinner, dancing, and surprises. I read it 3 times before the numbers at the bottom registered. Black tie required, cost per couple, $300. I scrolled through the comments, watching friends and colleagues RSVP enthusiastically. Can't wait! Going to be amazing! Jessica deserves the best. My hands trembled as I did the math in my head. If they were charging guests $300 per couple, and I could see 47 confirmed attendees so far, that meant I grabbed a calculator to be sure. Over $14,000 just from ticket sales for a birthday party. But that was just the beginning. I clicked through Jessica's Instagram stories from the party planning process, and each post felt like another slap. The custom floral arrangements, $15,000. The 5-course meal from the city's most exclusive caterer, $30,000. The live band she'd flown in from Nashville, $25,000. The designer dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, $8,000. I screenshotted everything, my cancer patient hands shaking with rage. When I added it all up, the total made me physically ill. $230,000. For one night, for one woman's birthday party, while I was facing death because I couldn't afford $85,000 for treatment. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. David, who couldn't find $85,000 to save his mother's life, had somehow found $230,000 to throw his wife a party that would last 6 hours. I called him that evening, my voice carefully controlled. David, I saw Jessica's party invitation. It looks lovely. A pause. Oh, yeah, it's going to be nice. Jessica's been planning it for months. It must be expensive, I said casually. The 4 seasons, the catering, all those details. Well, you know Jessica, she likes things to be perfect. He sounded uncomfortable, probably realizing where this conversation was heading. How much is it costing, David? The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Mom, that's not really your business. Humor me. I'm curious what perfect costs these days. Another pause. It's a special occasion. Jessica only turns 30 once. David, my voice sharpened. How much? About $200,000, he mumbled. Give or take. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd already done the math. $200,000 for a birthday party, but you can't find $85,000 to save my life? Those are completely different situations, Mom. The party is an investment in our social network. Our business relationships? An investment. My son was calling his wife's birthday party an investment while his mother faced death. I see, I said quietly. I'm glad I understand your priorities now. After I hung up, I sat in the darkness of my living room and made a decision that would change everything. If David thought I was going to die quietly and conveniently, he was wrong. I mortgaged my house the next morning. 50 years of marriage, 40 years in the same home, and I signed papers putting it all at risk for a chance to live. The bank officer, a kind woman named Mrs. Chen, seemed troubled by the urgency of my request. Mrs. Anderson, are you sure about this? At your age, a reverse mortgage might be a better option. I need the money now, I told her firmly. All of it. She processed the paperwork with professional efficiency, but I caught her glancing at me with concern when I walked out with a certified check for $92,000. My hands were steady for the first time in weeks. The Oncology Financial Office accepted my payment without question. Dr. Martinez scheduled my first treatment for the following Monday. I'm proud of you for fighting this, Eleanor, she said, reviewing my chart. This treatment has a 73% success rate. Those are good odds. Good odds paid for with everything I owned. But as I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced since receiving my diagnosis. Hope. Maybe I would live. Maybe I would get to see another Christmas, another spring in my garden, another year of life that David had been willing to let slip away. That weekend, social media exploded with photos from Jessica's birthday extravaganza. I scrolled through hundreds of images. Jessica in her $8,000 gown, the elaborate ice sculpture centerpieces, the custom cake that was apparently a replica of their house, complete with edible landscaping. David looked handsome and proud in his tuxedo, his arm around his radiant wife. In one photo, he was giving a toast, champagne glass raised, beaming smile across his face. The caption read, "My husband's speech about how nothing is too good for the woman he loves brought tears to everyone's eyes." Nothing too good for the woman he loved. I screenshotted that photo and caption, adding it to my growing collection of evidence. Evidence of what my life was worth to my son, less than his wife's birthday party. The chemotherapy began on Monday. The treatment was brutal, leaving me nauseated and exhausted, but I endured it with grim determination. Each session cost thousands of dollars, money that had once been the security of my home, my future, my peace of mind. But I was alive. Each day I woke up was a day David hadn't counted on, a day he'd been willing to sacrifice for his wife's social media moments. During my recovery periods between treatments, I began making plans. If I survived this cancer, and the odds suggested I would, I had some hard decisions to make about my relationship with my son, starting with whether I wanted to have one at all. 6 months later, Dr. Martinez delivered the news I'd been praying for: complete remission. The cancer was gone, eradicated by the treatment I'd nearly died to afford. I sat in her office, healthy and cancer-free, thinking about the son who'd never once called to ask about my progress, never visited during chemotherapy, never acknowledged that his mother had fought for her life alone. "You beat the odds, Eleanor," Dr. Martinez said, genuine warmth in her smile. "How do you feel?" Grateful, angry, relieved, devastated, but mostly I felt free. Free from the illusion that family meant unconditional love, free from the obligation to maintain relationships with people who saw me as disposable. "I feel like I have a second chance," I told her, and I intended to use it wisely. The first thing I did was sell my house. The mortgage I'd taken for my treatment meant I had little equity left, but the sale gave me enough to start over somewhere new, somewhere David wouldn't think to look for me. I chose Phoenix, Arizona, partly for the warm, dry climate that would be good for my recovering health, and partly because it was 1,500 miles from the life I was leaving behind. I rented a small apartment in a retirement community, nothing fancy, but it was mine and it was paid for. The second thing I did was disappear. I changed my phone number, closed my social media accounts, and left no forwarding address. When David's secretary called my old number, she would hear that it had been disconnected. When he drove by my old house, he would see strangers living there. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely invisible to the people who were supposed to love me. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I spent my first month in Phoenix, sleeping late, reading books I'd never had time for, and walking the desert trails around my new home. Slowly, I began to make friends with other residents in my community. Margaret, a retired teacher whose husband had died 2 years earlier. Frank, a former accountant who'd divorced his wife when he discovered she'd been stealing from their business. Sarah, whose children had moved to Europe and rarely called. We were a community of the abandoned, the forgotten, the discarded, and we were building something beautiful together. During my second month, Frank mentioned that he was looking for someone to help with bookkeeping for his small investment consulting business. "I can't pay much," he said over coffee in the community room, "but it would be legitimate work." I'd always been good with numbers, and I needed something to occupy my mind. What started as part-time bookkeeping evolved into investment advice, which led to managing portfolios for other residents. Turns out, when you're no longer worried about impressing anyone or maintaining family relationships, you can take calculated risks. Smart risks, it turned out, with money that was truly mine to invest. By month 6, I was earning more than I'd ever made in my old life, and David had no idea I was alive, let alone thriving. 1 year after disappearing, I was worth more than I'd ever dreamed possible. The investment portfolio I'd built for myself and my clients had grown by 300%, thanks to some calculated gambles on emerging technology stocks and a prescient bet on renewable energy companies. I'd also started a small financial consulting business, helping other seniors navigate retirement investments and estate planning. Word of mouth had brought me clients from across Phoenix, and I was booked solid with people who wanted advice from someone who understood what it meant to start over later in life. My little apartment had been replaced by a comfortable house in an upscale neighborhood, complete with a garden where I could grow the vegetables I'd missed. I had a new car, a reliable friend circle, and a growing bank account that proved I was far from the helpless burden David had considered me. But the most satisfying change was internal. The woman who'd begged her son for her life was gone, replaced by someone harder, smarter, and completely self-reliant. I'd learned to trust my own judgment, to value my own worth, and to never again give anyone the power to determine whether I lived or died. My cancer remained in remission, my health was excellent, and my future was entirely my own. I'd built a life David couldn't touch, couldn't control, and didn't even know existed. Every morning, I woke up grateful for the second chance I'd given myself, the chance he'd been unwilling to provide. Late at night sometimes, I wondered if he ever thought about me. Did he assume I died quietly, as he'd apparently hoped? Did he feel guilty about refusing to help me? Did he even remember that he had a mother? But those thoughts came less frequently now. I was too busy living the life I'd saved to spend much time thinking about the son who'd been willing to let me die. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt, and some relationships, once you see them clearly, aren't worth saving. I was about to discover that David had learned that lesson too, but from the other side. 6 years after I'd vanished from David's life, he found me through the one thing I couldn't hide: success. My financial consulting firm had been featured in Phoenix Business Weekly, complete with a photo of me standing in front of my downtown office. The article called me the investment whisperer and detailed how I'd turned struggling retirees into confident investors. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my secretary, Angela, buzzed my office. "Mrs. Anderson, there's a man here who claims to be your son. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's quite insistent." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. After 6 years of silence, David had tracked me down. "Does he look desperate?" I asked, surprising myself with how calm my voice sounded. Angela paused. "Yes, ma'am. He looks like he's been through hell." "Perfect. Send him in." I straightened my shoulders and prepared to meet the stranger who used to be my son. David walked into my office, and I barely recognized him. The confident lawyer in expensive suits had been replaced by a hollow-eyed man in wrinkled clothes that hung loose on his frame. His hair was longer, unkempt, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and crushing stress. "Hello, David." I didn't stand up, didn't offer him a seat. I simply waited. He stood in the doorway, staring at me as if I were a ghost. "Mom? Jesus, we all thought you were dead." "Dead?" I raised an eyebrow. "How dramatic. I'm very much alive, as you can see." He moved closer to my desk, his eyes taking in the expensive furniture. The framed awards on the walls, the view of downtown Phoenix through floor-to-ceiling windows. This is incredible. You look amazing, healthy, successful. Cancer-free for 5.5 years, I said matter-of-factly. The treatment worked beautifully. Of course, you wouldn't know that, since you never called to check. His face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like the 12-year-old boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was selfish. You were exactly who you are," I interrupted. "Nothing more, nothing less. The question is, what do you want now?" David collapsed into the chair across from my desk, without invitation. "I need your help," he whispered, and there it was. The real reason for his visit. Not remorse, not love, not a desire to reconcile. He needed something from me. Again. "Help with what, David?" My voice could have frozen water. "Everything's gone, Mom. The house, the car, the practice, everything. Jessica cleaned me out and disappeared with her personal trainer." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out she'd been planning it for 2 years. Moved all our money offshore, convinced me to put everything in her name for tax purposes. I was so stupidly in love. I signed whatever she put in front of me. I listened to David's tale of financial ruin with the same expression I'd wear while reviewing a particularly boring quarterly report. Jessica had systematically destroyed him, using the same calculating precision she'd once applied to planning her extravagant birthday parties. She convinced me to mortgage the house again to invest in her friend's tech startup, David continued, his voice hollow with shame. Said we'd double our money in 6 months? The company never existed. It was all fake documentation, fake websites, fake investor presentations. How much did you lose? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Everything. $2 million. Our entire net worth, plus what we borrowed against future earnings. He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Mom, I'm facing bankruptcy. Criminal charges. The state bar is reviewing my license. $2 million. I did quick mental math, remembering the newspaper coverage of Jessica's birthday party 6 years ago. If they'd had that kind of money to throw around then, David's law practice had been far more successful than I'd realized. The personal trainer she left with, I said conversationally. How long had that been going on? David's hands clenched into fists. At least 3 years, maybe longer. Brad Morrison, the guy who helped plan her birthday party. They were probably laughing at me the whole time, planning this while I was writing checks for ice sculptures and custom floral arrangements. The irony was so perfect, it was almost artistic. Jessica had used David's money, the money he'd claimed he couldn't spare to save his mother's life, to fund her affair and plan her escape. Where is she now? I asked. Costa Rica, we think. No extradition treaty. She transferred everything to shell companies down there. David leaned forward desperately. Mom, I know I don't deserve to ask, but I'm drowning. The lawyers want $50,000 just to start building a defense. I don't have $50 to my name. $50,000. Less than the cost of my cancer treatment, which he'd refused to pay. The cosmic justice of it all was almost too much to appreciate properly. And you thought of me, I mused. After 6 years of silence, you tracked me down because you need money. I made a mistake, he said, tears starting to flow. The biggest mistake of my life. I should have helped you, should have found the money somehow. I was scared, confused, listening to Jessica instead of my own heart. You chose your wife over your mother, I said simply. People make choices, David. They live with consequences. He was crying openly now, the successful lawyer facade completely gone. I lost everything, Mom. My marriage, my career, my reputation, my money, everything. Not everything, I corrected him. You still have your life. I almost didn't have that luxury. Remember? David looked up sharply, finally understanding what I was telling him. The cancer treatment worked. You survived. I survived because I saved myself. I mortgaged my house, paid for my own treatment, and beat cancer without any help from my loving son. I could have lost you forever, he whispered. You did lose me, I replied. 6 years ago, when you chose $85,000 over your mother's life. The woman sitting here now? She's someone else entirely. David spent the next hour begging, pleading, promising to change, to be different, to make amends for his betrayal 6 years earlier. I listened with the detached interest of someone watching a moderately entertaining movie. When he finally exhausted himself, I picked up my phone. Angela, please bring in the Morrison file. David looked confused. Morrison? Brad Morrison, Jessica's personal trainer turned business partner. You didn't think I'd let the man who helped destroy my son operate in my city without doing some research, did you? Angela entered with a thick folder, which I opened deliberately slowly. Let's see what Mr. Morrison has been up to since fleeing to Costa Rica with your wife. David leaned forward, desperate for any information about the man who'd stolen his life. Interesting story, actually. Brad and Jessica lasted about 6 months before she cleaned him out, too. Apparently, she's quite democratic in her theft. She took his half of your money and disappeared to Venezuela. Brad made it back to the States about 2 years ago, completely broke. David's face went through several expressions, settling on bitter satisfaction. Good. I hope they both rot. Well, Brad certainly has been struggling. But here's the fascinating part, I continued, pulling out a photograph. He's been working as a personal trainer here in Phoenix, at the gym 3 blocks from my office. The color drained from David's face. You knew? You knew he was here and didn't tell me? Why would I tell you anything? David? We haven't spoken in 6 years. As far as I knew, you thought I was dead. I set the photo aside. But since you're here now, perhaps you'd like to know what else I've discovered. I pulled out another document, this one thick with legal language. Brad has been quite talkative about his time with Jessica. Seems he's willing to testify about her financial crimes in exchange for immunity. Something about forged documents, identity theft, wire fraud across international lines. David grabbed the document with shaking hands. This could clear me. If I can prove Jessica manipulated me, that I was a victim too. It could, I agreed. The federal prosecutor handling your case is particularly interested in Brad's testimony. Apparently, Jessica victimized several other men the same way. You're part of a pattern. Hope flickered in David's eyes for the first time since he'd entered my office. Mom, how did you get this information? Get this. How did you even know to look? I smiled, and it wasn't entirely kind. David, I built a multi-million-dollar investment firm from nothing in 6 years. Did you think I accomplished that without learning how to gather information? Multi-million? His voice was barely a whisper. I gestured around my office. The business is worth $4.2 million. My personal portfolio is worth another $3.8. $8 million, David. Built from the ashes of the life you and Jessica helped destroy. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. You're rich, really rich. I'm successful, I corrected. I'm independent. I'm beholden to no one, and no one can take what I've built away from me. It's a wonderful feeling. David was quiet for a long moment, processing everything I'd told him. The information about Brad, about Jessica's other victims. You're going to help me? I closed the folder and looked at my son with eyes that had learned to be hard. I'm going to give you a choice, David. The same kind of choice you gave me 6 years ago. Here's your choice, I said, my voice steady as granite. I have enough evidence and connections to clear your name completely. Brad Morrison is willing to testify. I know the federal prosecutor personally, and I have documentation proving Jessica's systematic fraud. I can make your legal problems disappear with a phone call. David's breathing quickened. What do you want in return? I want you to understand what it feels like to beg for your life. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a check already made out in his name. $50,000, enough to pay for your legal defense and get you back on your feet. His eyes fixed on the check like a drowning man seeing a life preserver. But there's a condition, I continued. You have to ask me for it the same way I asked you for help 6 years ago. You have to get on your knees in this office and beg your mother to save your life. The silence stretched between us, thick with years of hurt and betrayal. David stared at the check, then at me, understanding finally dawning in his eyes. You want me to humiliate myself. I want you to experience what you put me through, I said simply. The desperation, the helplessness, the knowledge that your future depends entirely on someone else's mercy. David's jaw worked as he struggled with his pride. And if I don't? Then you can walk out of here the same way you let me walk out of your life, empty-handed and alone. I held up the file about Brad Morrison. This information dies with me. The prosecutor never gets her star witness. You face the charges alone. For a moment I thought he might refuse. The old David, the arrogant lawyer who'd valued his wife's birthday party over his mother's life, would have walked out in a rage. But this broken man in front of me was learning what desperation really meant. Slowly, David slid from his chair onto his knees beside my desk. His voice cracked as he spoke. Please, Mom, I'm begging you. Save my life. Tears streamed down his face as he continued. I was wrong 6 years ago. I was selfish and cruel, and I failed you when you needed me most. Please don't let me destroy myself the way I almost let you die. I looked down at my son, kneeling on the expensive carpet of my corner office, and felt something unexpected, not satisfaction, but sadness. This wasn't the victory I'd imagined. It was just tragedy repeating itself in a different key. Stand up, David. He climbed back into his chair, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I handed him the check and the Morrison file. Your legal problems will be resolved within the month. Brad's testimony will clear you completely. Why? He whispered. After everything I did to you, why are you helping me? I leaned back in my chair, suddenly feeling every one of my 68 years. Because I learned something about myself when I was fighting cancer alone. I learned that I'm stronger than I ever knew, But I also learned that I don't want to become the kind of person who abandons family when they're desperate. David clutched the check, fresh tears starting. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you. No, I agreed. You don't. But that's not why I'm doing it. 6 months later, David's charges were dropped. Brad Morrison's testimony had exposed Jessica's entire network of financial fraud, and David was officially classified as a victim rather than a co-conspirator. The state bar restored his license, and he'd started a small practice specializing in elder law and fraud recovery. He called me every Sunday now, not asking for anything, just checking in. The conversations were still awkward, still careful, but they were real in a way our relationship had never been before. We were both different people now, shaped by loss and betrayal, and the hard-won knowledge that love isn't unconditional. I have something for you, David said during one of our calls. I've been working on it for months. The next week, he flew to Phoenix with a cashier's check for $85,000. It's not enough, he said, handing it to me in my office. It'll never be enough to make up for what I did. But it's exactly what I should have given you 6 years ago, plus interest. I looked at the check, then set it aside. David, I don't need your money anymore. I know, but I need to give it to you, not because you need it, but because I need to prove to myself that I'm not the man who let his mother face cancer alone. We talked for hours that day, really talked, for the first time since he was a child. He told me about the depression that had consumed him after Jessica left, the therapy he'd started, the slow process of rebuilding his sense of self-worth. I told him about my business, my friends in Phoenix, the life I'd built from nothing. I'm proud of you, he said as he prepared to leave. I know I don't have the right to be, but I'm proud of the woman you've become. I'm proud of the man you're becoming, I replied. Not the man you were, but the man you're choosing to be now. As I watched his taxi disappear into Phoenix traffic, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. 6 years ago, I'd faced death alone because my son chose money over my life. Now, he'd lost everything and discovered what really mattered. Not wealth or status or social connections, but the people who stand by you when everything falls apart. I'd saved myself, built a fortune, and proven I didn't need anyone's rescue. But in the end, the most valuable thing I'd gained wasn't money or success or independence. It was the knowledge that I was strong enough to forgive without forgetting, to help without enabling, and to love without surrendering my self-worth. Some lessons cost everything to learn. David had learned his. And in teaching it to him, I'd learned something too, that sometimes the most powerful victory isn't defeating your enemies, but showing them a better way to be human. Life had taught him a hard lesson. I'd taught him a harder one. But in the end, we'd both learned the hardest lesson of all, that family isn't about blood or obligation, but about choosing to stand by each other even when it costs everything you have. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.